Alright, so in this lesson I'm going to talk to you about exposition. So we have seen the term exposition twice at the beginning of the story arc and as one of the 5 modes of storytelling. So which is it? It's actually both. The part of a story arc called exposition is where the reader is figuring out who the characters are, what their situation is. But if you give too much information at once without anything happening in the story, you're going to bore your readers. So you don't want to just do exposition right at the beginning and inundate them with it. Okay? So one way to handle this is to give a small chunk of exposition at the beginning, then squeeze in some more throughout the story. So in this mini lesson, we're going to explore a few ways to add exposition to your story. Before we do, we'll look at 2 exposition rules to follow. Okay, so number 1, only give information that's necessary to the story. If your character's height doesn't affect the story, don't tell us how tall he is. If it doesn't really matter what town the story takes place in, leave that information out. So in my story where I was talking about the watch that I stole from a friend, from my best friend, I didn't write on there that it took place in Panama. Okay, I did write that it took place in her house. That part of it is important expository information to add. So then you're going to also keep the story moving. If you spend too much time in exposition but nothing actually happens, your reader will get bored. So there's 4 strategies you can try for adding exposition to the story. They are expository paragraphs, between lines of narration or dialogue, inside dialogue, or inside interior monologue. Let's look at examples of each one of these. So expository paragraphs are whole paragraphs that just give us background information about the characters or their situation. Here's an example. I have always wanted my parents to let me stay at home alone, but they almost never do. I'm 13. It's ridiculous. They'll go to the store for 30 minutes or maybe let me stay home while they have a dentist appointment or something, but otherwise, if they're going to be gone more than an hour, they have a babysitter come over. So, this is an expository paragraph. Notice that they don't go on for very long. You can also squeeze a little bit of exposition in between other things, like lines of narration or dialogue. So here's an example of putting exposition in the middle of some narration. It says, I turned it up loud. They were always telling me to turn it down, and danced around the kitchen. So the sentence is about Bree dancing, but it's interrupted to give us a bit of information about her parents' usual rules. You could do the same thing with a line of dialogue. Okay, so this right here, the bolded part, is the exposition. Wait for me, he called. Since his injury, Matthias had trouble keeping up with me. I have some news. So here is the expository lines. So they kind of pepper it in little by little in between some of the narration or some of the dialogue. Another way to add exposition is right inside a line of dialogue. In other words, have the characters say something that provides information about them. Like in this example, do you think I'm going to open the door to some serial killer or burn the house down or something? I get good grades in school and I've never gotten in trouble, but apparently I can't be trusted. So this is a way that they're able to give you information about this character. They're a good student. They don't get in trouble. Okay? When you use this technique, it's important to make the dialogue sound natural. For example, why do you always ask Chloe, a college student, to babysit me? That sounds weird because no one really actually talks like that. A character would not say that. So only add exposition when it would make sense in the conversation. Finally, you can add exposition inside interior monologue, the character's thoughts inside her head. Ugh, Arthur? The last time I watched that show was 6 years ago. Here, Bree is reacting to her father's suggestion that they watch the show, Arthur, and in her thoughts she adds that she hasn't watched the show in 6 years. She doesn't say this out loud, but she's thinking it. That's called interior monologue. Now, you're going to look at the draft you're working on for your story, for your narrative, and you're going to try using all 4 of these techniques to add to parts of your story. So let me go back. You're going to try adding expository paragraphs. You're going to try adding exposition between lines of narration, inside dialogue, and inside interior monologue.